Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Tony, it's Rutgers week. How do you think it's going?
Well, yeah, I shouldn't need to ask. It is going as Rutgersy as possible. Tom, I spent some time watching the Iowa-Rutgers game from last week. Now, I personally think the Surgeon General needs to leave the cigarettes alone for a while and put some labels on Big Ten football. Just if you're going to watch this, just know that it is not good for your health. Like, I right now am not allowed to operate heavy machinery, and so I might be taking this show even more lazily than I do most shows. So just be aware, but if I doze off or something like that, it's not entirely you. Some of it was having to watch Rutgers and Iowa.
Yeah, that game had the lowest over-under I think I can ever remember seeing. And it did go over, but it only barely went over, and it took 2 non-offensive touchdowns for it to go over. So that's how that went. Not tremendous, I think, was my takeaway there. Not particularly good.
The fun thing about Rutgers is you never know what you're going to see, and that's good, bad, indifferent. There's always going to be crazy things to watch, and we'll get into that in a little bit as we discuss this game in depth, but not too in depth because we want you to stay with us. All right, it's not gonna go too deep on Rutgers, but we will talk about it. Up first, let's talk about the health of the Buckeyes. Ryan Day gave no updates on Jackson Smith-Njigba or Cam Brown on Thursday. He did say he expects Denzel Burke back, so that is good. Given the way the corners played, and if you're getting Denzel Burke back, I don't know that you need to bring Cam Brown back this week. Maybe you do it if you can next week at Michigan State, since they have some receiver talent. At this point, I don't see any reason to rush Jackson Smith-Njigba back until Iowa.
And I mean, are you worried about keeping up with the Iowa offense? Is that the big concern? I think real frankly, I think if none of these guys are back until Penn State, Ohio State will probably survive just fine. I think Ohio State will be able to. Yeah, I mean, Iowa's defense is okay, so they might hold Ohio State into the 30s, but that's probably about 28 points more than Iowa's going to muster. So that'll be okay. This is a week coming up against Rutgers where I don't know that I would necessarily rush Denzel Burke back out there. This might be, in the same way, if they got away with it against Wisconsin last week without any major issues, are you thinking Rutgers is going to present a much more substantial challenge to the Ohio State defense this week? And if not, maybe isn't it beneficial to give J.K. Johnson and Jair Brown a whole nother game of reps in a situation where the offense is going to score? I mean, what is the absolute bare minimum? Ohio State walks off the bus and you can immediately put X number of points on the scoreboard tomorrow. 31, 35? Like what is there is no possible way, if this game is played, Ohio State finishes with fewer than this number of points.
Yeah, I would say 31 is maybe 30 and they kick a bunch of field goals. Maybe it's, 3 touchdowns, 3 field goals, something like that. But as we know, as long as Ryan Day gets to 30, they're fine. And the only way I see Rutgers getting to 30 is if Ohio State is getting to 70. It's one of those things.
Yeah, if Ohio State is really, if Ohio State's at, maybe this is the 1995 Iowa game where Ohio State's up 56-0 or 56-7 at half, and and then you put in the third stringers, and then you give up some silly points, or you have a turnover for a touchdown, whatever. I don't think. I think this is not a terrible Rutgers team. This is not the worst Rutgers team we've ever seen. But for whatever reason, Ohio State has just handled Rutgers, and it is net. There have been bad teams where they've kind of had sloggy kind of games against them. They've just been very efficient against Rutgers and just sort of like handled their business. And all of these games have been over by the second quarter. And I think this could be, not a complete blowout and not a complete embarrassment, but also over by the second quarter. So with that in mind, I think you keep it real careful with Jackson Smith and Jigba. There's no reason to bring him back. You keep it real safe with Cam Brown. There's no reason to bring him back. Jordan Hancock sounds like he's not, that's not really even a decision. And then, Denzel Burke, it's a hand injury. I don't think we're breaking any news there because he was standing on the sideline with, a cast on his hand with a couple fingers. So it's, broken fingers, broken hand bone, something like that. If you don't need him this week, maybe you dress him for for Michigan State next week because maybe it's a little more of a challenge. But I don't see any real reason to rush him back if there's even a small chance that you might aggravate something that would keep him out down the line when you might need him against a Penn State or Michigan or Georgia. I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm running out of teams they might need him against pretty quickly as I'm sort of running through the schedule mentally right now.
Yeah, looking at past games against Rutgers, the 2020 game where it was just going to be like, why are we even playing this sort of thing? And Rutgers pulls out all of these stops and they score 27, doing everything they can possibly do to score as many as they can. The 2019 game, they scored 21. And that's the high watermark for what Rutgers has done against Ohio State over the last 8 years. And if just watching this Rutgers offense, I don't know where the 31 points are going to come from to make this a possible outcome. Especially now, Tom, that the Buckeyes are getting Parker Lewis back. So, I can't even say
they can't lose, Tony. They can't lose.
I can't even say they're getting him back. They're getting him first. This is the first time that he's now eligible. They brought him on as a kickoff specialist, but freshman walk-on Jaden Fielding has done so well with that. They still need him to get better, but he's done so well with that Ryan Day said, Parker Lewis is the backup. So you've got, I guess, well, he's not on scholarship yet. Alex Kleitman has said that he was not planning to be on scholarship until the winter. So you've got two walk-ons handling the kickoff duties, and of course Noah Ruggles handling the other placements, and so that seems set there. And if this comes down to the kicking game, I would be shocked. So, but just wanted to mention the Parker Lewis thing. So, Tom, let's get into this Rutgers offense. They came into the season, Noah Vedral was probably going to be the starting quarterback. He was the starter last year, and then they had high 4-star Gavin Wimsatt out of Kentucky, was a blue chip guy that everybody wanted. He somehow decided to sign with Rutgers, and that's Greg Schiano doing a great job of recruiting. Neither of those guys have really been a quarterback this year. Vedral has been out. He could have played last week along with Gavin Wimsatt. Both were held out against Iowa. They were emergency guys. Schiano says they're progressing. Obviously, he's trying to create some sort of subterfuge. Like, well, I don't even know who's going to play this week. And so that Ohio State has to plan for all of these guys. Except all of these guys are pretty similar, that they can all run and they can all throw. So really, I don't know how diverse and how many different plans you have to make for these quarterbacks, because even, it's not Joe Montana or Steve Young. Spoiler alert. These are all guys that are very similar.
In many ways, it's not Joe Montana and Steve Young. 1, because those are different types of quarterbacks. 2, because those were good quarterbacks. 3, because those quarterbacks had some remarkable talent around them. So in many ways, it is not quite similar to that. It feels like, I guess you're going to want to bring those guys, bring those guys back in if you can. Gavin Wimsatt has not gotten off to a tremendous start this season. He's been kind of, I think he was sub 50% in terms of completion percentage. Noah Vedral, you saw Noah Vedral last year, and he's fine. He is, kind of like the replacement level Big Ten quarterback, I think, where it's fine and it's nothing spectacular. Nearly beat Michigan up in Ann Arbor last year, but other than that, nothing spectacular. I think Greg Schiano needs to manage this with the idea that, look, you can pull out whatever you want to pull out this week. You can play whoever you want to play. You're probably not beating Ohio State. They've got a couple winnable games after that. They've got Nebraska the week after, and then they have Nebraska at home, and then they have a week off, and then they have Indiana at home. If they're 5-2, those are winnable games. If you're 5-2, including a loss to Ohio State this weekend, then you're potentially a bowl team. You're the schedule gets a little tougher for them long term, but you finish with Maryland, you win that 6th game, you're a bowl team. That's, I think, what he needs to keep in mind, which means I don't think you're going to see them pulling out all the stops this week, and I don't know that you're going to see all those guys playing a ton. It may be more just sort of get them into the game, get them into the flow of the game a little bit if they're healthy enough, but I don't think you're going to see anything crazy.
Just accept your fate, that sort of thing?
Basically, yes.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought where you save some of this crazy stuff for other teams, or maybe you're just not going to do the crazy stuff against other teams, and you do it here. Their third quarterback, Evan Simon, has been starting this season. He threw for 300 last week against Iowa. As I said, they'll run him as well with the read option, and he can do a little bit of escaping. But like whoever they have back there, I think is going to be doing a lot of running out of desperation and scrambling, not necessarily the called stuff. And the Ohio State defense should really be getting after him. Evan Simon threw a couple of interceptions last week. I think he had 2 more dropped. He actually broke up one of the interceptions that he was throwing, Tom, which is pretty remarkable. Threw a pass that got tipped up and then tipped back towards him, and he was scrambling, so he's running towards the sidelines. He throws it. It gets batted up into the air backwards towards him, and one of the defenders was going up to grab it, and you had Evan Simon come in and put his head on the ball and dislodge it. So a PBU on your own throw. That's Rutgers.
I'm just wondering how close he got to getting called for targeting on that play, because I don't think I've ever seen a quarterback get called for targeting before. That's one that I'd like to see at some point.
Defenseless defensive player.
Oh, aren't they all defenseless in a way, though? Really, looking through their stats this year, I mean, they're 3-1. They beat Boston College by 1 point. They beat Temple by 2 points. They beat Wagner by 500,000 points, and then lost to Iowa in the game we discussed earlier. But you look at the games they've played, and their completion percentage is 58.77. Opponent's completion percentage 57.52. 726 yards to 772 yards, 5 touchdowns for them, 5 touchdowns for their opponents, 4 interceptions for them, 4 interceptions for their opponents. I mean, boy, I don't think I could paint you a more clear picture of what the start of the season has looked like for them. And this is, this is the very definition of winning ugly. But with the history of Rutgers being what it is, winning ugly, all you have to say is winning, and then every Rutgers fan is going to go, yeah, fine, I don't care. I don't care what words come after that. If they're winning, they're winning. They're 3-1. I think they will probably lose ugly this weekend, but there's not quite enough talent there yet. Schiano has kind of done the transfer portal thing to patch over some holes and get the talent level up a little bit. And they're doing okay in recruiting. They're not absolutely lighting the world on fire, but they've been okay. It's just right now they have kind of a weird roster where there's a lot of seniors and there's like a lot of sophomores. And there's just kind of, the Schiano recruits are starting to work their way through the program, but it's going to take time because they really had to strip it down to the studs when he got there. And they're not yet to the point where they have enough talent to really be interesting yet.
And he can land blue chippers here and there. It takes a long time to be able to land enough to put together like more than just one in a class. You can't just have tent poles. You also have to have canvas as well, and other things like that. It's just, well, it's nice poles you got here. It's not enough. It's like you're still getting rained on.
They said that about the Bada Bing too. Speaking of New Jersey,
they say a lot of things about the Bada Bing. Tom, speaking of New Jersey and this Rutgers team and this defense, they have allowed 7 touchdowns defensively, just like Ohio State has. So isn't this really like the Spider-Man pointing meme at this point when these two teams get together?
Assuming one of the Spider-Man is significantly better at shooting the web thing out of his hand and swinging and not, crashing into the sides of buildings. Yes, it's exactly like that meme. Yes.
It's like Spider-Man versus the greatest American hero. Timely reference.
The only kind you make. Yes, it is. Yeah, I think they have they have both had good solid starts to the season. Ohio State 4-0, Rutgers 3-1. I think your big takeaway, though, dear listener, should be they've gotten there in kind of different ways. The end results have been kind of similar, but they've gotten there in very very different ways.
Speaking of Nebraska, just real quick, this is a stat that I threw out on Friday, which is today. Iowa has allowed 23 points this season. Nebraska has allowed 22 scoring drives.
So I think my takeaway there is there's a reason that one of those head coaches still has his job and the other one doesn't. Maybe Scott Frost should have hired one of his kids to run the defense. You ever think of that, smart guy? Huh?
You make a great point. 8-year-old Billy Frost out there. Could he be any worse? No, he could not. So, one of the Rutgers weapons, Johnny Langan. You might know him from past Rutgers games as the starting quarterback or the starting running quarterback. Johnny Langan, he's a tight end now in kind of name only. He's just one of these weird weapon kind of guys. He's got 19 carries on the season for 120 yards. They'll use him as a wildcat. He's got 8 catches for 86 yards. He's thrown it twice for 43 yards and 1 touchdown. I wish I would have done just a little bit of like research and thought process in my bold predictions because, well, I don't even know if it's all that bold, but I guarantee Johnny Langan is throwing a double pass in this game. Like they're going to throw to him, like they'll back out of the slot and they'll throw to him and he'll throw it downfield, trying to complete one of these long passes and trying to get some sort of a chunk play against an aggressive Ohio State defense, especially if you're playing young corners. That might be something to watch for there, Tom.
Yeah, 4 Rutgers quarterbacks throw a pass in this game. Like that is absolutely a possibility for Rutgers players anyway. And Langan is someone who I think Ohio State fans may remember. I think it was last year at Rutgers where, again, Ohio State's up 1 million immediately and the game was over, 2-3 drives in. But Langan was someone who I think had a couple long runs out of the just, wildcat kind of QB formation. He has been, I don't know that I would necessarily say effective, like he's really changed the outcome of the game in any material way, but he's made some plays against Ohio State in the past, and so that he's someone I'm sure Ohio State will be, well aware of. That's something that if they're not facing a lot of running quarterbacks, Daquan Finn kind of tore him up a little bit a couple weeks ago. That's probably not a bad thing to let Jim Knowles and his defense. Okay, here's another guy who's a running quarterback. Let's see how they handle this, and do they show improvement? Because Langan can throw the ball. He's not a fantastic quarterback, but he can throw the ball. He's not JJ McCarthy, but he'll be okay. So that I think that's going to be just one of those little small things we can kind of keep an eye on as we look at this game.
By the way, time has been so crazy the last few years. That game you're talking about was 2019, where he carried the ball 10 times for 42 yards, Johnny Langan. And he's been around a while, and they've had bad quarterbacks for a very long time. And he's so not good enough to play quarterback at Rutgers full time anymore, which kind of tells you where he is on the scale.
That's remarkable, but I guess the last 2 Rutgers games have both been 3:30 kickoffs where the sun's, sort of setting towards the end of the game, and Ohio State jumps out to a really early lead, and Chris Olave makes a touchdown catch or something, and it's all these Rutgers games kind of blend together, which if you are familiar with the series history of Ohio State and Rutgers, you can probably figure out why.
Yeah, he had a 1 carry for 1 yard last year and then 5 for 15 the year before. So I'm watching this broadcast, the 60-minute version. I do not recommend watching the full version of Iowa Rutgers. If you do, talk to somebody, speak with somebody, reach out. But there was mention of the 3-headed monster at running back for Rutgers, and I was like, Grover is technically a monster. So yes, like Elmo is like a monster, right? So yes, in that way, I'm not saying they're puppets, but I'm also saying they're not all that scary. This is not, Ray Rice, Saquon Barkley, and whoever else they've had committed there at Jonathan Taylor. All of these New Jersey guys that have been able to go through there. But it's I don't think they're going to be able to run the ball all that well either. And I certainly don't think it's a monster. Just another test to, I think this is going to be one of those, the competitive stamina thing. They gave up that 75-yarder to Braylon Allen last week. I wonder what the focus is this week as the game is just, midway through the second quarter, what's the score? And then midway through the third quarter, how many backups are in there? And they're going to have to play better than they did a week ago.
They just need to kind of finish the drill, I think, is kind of the biggest thing. And I don't think there's a Braylon Allen on this team. The three-headed monster is not, it's like a three-headed puppy, but it's, like a bunch of golden retrievers. It's not like Cerberus. So they do not have anyone on the team who's averaging 40 yards a game, except for one guy who played one game and ran for 3.7 yards, 11 carries for 42 yards in one game, and he's the only one who's averaging 40 yards a game. There's just not a lot of not a lot of breakaway here. There's the leading rusher in terms of number of carries averaging 3.7 yards per carry. 3.7, 5.8, 4.9, 6.3, which is Johnny Langan, and then 8.2, which is Gavin Wimsett. And it's just the three running backs are just kind of like, they're fine, I guess. I don't see a lot of real big play ability there. So, unless you have kind of a broken play quarterback run type of thing, I don't anticipate Rutgers is going to be able to move the ball on the ground pretty consistently. And I don't think they're going to be able to move the ball through the air very consistently, which, Tony, at that point, you're kind of running out of ways to move the ball.
Yes, Tom. At first, I want to get back to the three-headed puppy, which sounds so cute and so sad.
Who's a good boy? Who's a good boy? It's Rutgers football. Buy tickets now.
Yeah, if they're not running the ball, they're not throwing the ball. That's where we get to the trick plays, the special teams trick plays. Ryan Day talked about how do you handle these things? How do you handle trick plays? And he said, well, you got to stay aggressive on defense. You can't just sit back and wait for the trick plays. You've got to be as aggressive as you normally are and then just be sound. And, we've seen a pretty sound defense from Ohio State this year. But again, I'm still wondering how those young corners are going to do, because I think they're going to get targeted on some of these trick plays. There was mention, this is from Ryan Day's radio show, where it was brought up the TCU kickoff return, where you had a TCU Horned Frog laying flat down in the end zone, and he was relaying that his thought process during the game, and as before the kickoff, he had somebody screaming in his headphones that there's a man down in the end zone. There's a man down in the end zone. And so Ryan Day looks over there and sees a man down. He's like, he didn't know what was going on. He's like, did somebody get shot or something like that? And then the kickoff happens, and that's when he kind of realizes, oh, we are screwed here, because he couldn't call a timeout. Something is up. And then you see the throwback to the guy who was laying down, and he takes it all the way down for a touchdown. And then he looks back to the other side of the field and sees a flag. And he mentioned, like, he still thinks about that and wonders where would things have been for him now at Ohio State had that flag not been thrown. Like, is that the thing that allowed him to, win that game and then give everybody the confidence that he could take over in 2019? So just an interesting thing, that a moment in time that will stick with Ryan Day forever. And so he is now always on the lookout for dudes laying face first in the end zone.
I don't know what to make of the fact that his first thought was, did someone get shot? That's like, did you just watch The Last Boy Scout? Like, what are we, where did that come from in terms of your potential, your thought of, what possible explanations are there? Here's the first one I thought of. Yeah, that is a very sneaky play. And, Rutgers has didn't they have a throwback on a kickoff or a punt return or something in 2020, and it's part of that second half where they really did pull out all the stops, and that was Schiano's first game against Ohio State since taking over for the second time, and that was I think at that point a little bit of a statement where he was just going to show this is not the same Rutgers that's just going to sort of put a little twist on the TCU thing. They're not going to take this lying down, Tony. They're going to put up a fight, and they're going to, even if it's lopsided at halftime, they're going to keep swinging and keep chopping, as Greg Schiano likes to say. And, I mean, they kind of proved their point there. They didn't get close to winning, but it was enough that it was an annoying game for Ohio State, that it was as close as it was towards the end, and they couldn't put in, the second and third stringers like they probably would have wanted to. That in and of itself is probably one of the big reasons why CJ Stroud had 0 pass attempts in 2020, because that was one of the games that was maybe the most lopsided. You didn't have non-conference games that year. So Greg Schiano being a pain in the butt in the second half is probably one of the reasons you didn't see CJ Stroud or Jack Miller with a pass attempt in 2020. So I don't know that you're necessarily going to see as much of that here, because, I mean, as I said earlier, there are winnable games ahead. This is not a winnable game. And I think if you really got Greg Schiano in an honest moment, he's going to, right now he's going to coach speak it if he's in front of a microphone and say, well, it's going to be a tremendous challenge. That means you're going to get your butt whipped, and you know that you're going to get your butt whipped, and that's okay because you have Nebraska on the schedule next. You have Indiana on the schedule coming up. I think the smart play is focus on those and don't spend all of your good trick plays against Ohio State. But, it is something that Ohio State needs to be prepared for, to your point. And I'm sure they will be. I'm sure that film gets put on every year during Rutgers week in a don't let this happen again kind of way.
You say, why would Ryan Day think that? First thought is, somebody got shot or something like that. But now I think this is kind of right up Greg Schiano's alley, because 1, it's very tricky. 2, it's very New Jersey. So let's. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it very well could. And then also, Tom, it would also give new meaning to the going to the mattresses. If you see a Rutgers player take an air mattress into the end zone, that's your first sign right there. Make note of that. Tom, if Devin Brown throws a pass in this game, I'm not sure if you saw the note, the stat I put on the message board, the huddle message board. He will become the 5th true freshman for Ohio State in the last 25 years to throw a pass in a game. Can you name the other 4?
5th true freshman to throw a pass in the last 25 years. Okay. Boy, I wish I had looked at the board right before we hit record on this. Let's see. True freshman. Well, Terrell Pryor, number 1. Braxton Miller, number 2. Trying to think through games where they've had a true freshman come in very early. Well, obviously last year, Kyle McCord, he's number 3. And there's 2 more I've got to figure out.
1 more. Devin Brown would be the 5th.
Devin Brown would be the 5th. Okay, so 1 more. And how far back does this stat go?
About 25 years.
25 years, till the late 90s. Krenzel wasn't. Troy Smith and Justin Zwick didn't. True freshman. Is this going to be something real? I'll tell you what. Will you tell me, is this a quarterback, or is this going to be Michael Wiley did as a freshman or something stupid like that?
It is a quarterback.
It is a quarterback.
He was not drafted as a quarterback.
He was not drafted as a quarterback. I already said Braxton Miller. In the interest of keeping the show moving, why don't you just tell me?
He's the one guy that nobody else got on the board either. Steve Bellisaria in 1998.
Steve Bellisaria as a true freshman?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, he did play. He did play as on special teams in '98. So yeah,
he was 3 for 5 throwing the ball. He played on special teams. He also had an interception as a true freshman. So
he had a bunch of those later in his career too.
One of the rare Ohio State quarterbacks who not only threw the ball in a game, but also had an interception later on in the season. So great job by you, Tom. I was also fooled by the Steve Bellisaria one, because I had to go through and look, and I was surprised that he was in there. So let's go ahead and discuss our picks, because this is it's down to a 39.5 point line. It was at one point 41.5 or 42. And I think people have been burnt by these Rutgers lines, because it's just, you've seen it. I mean, Ohio State was like a 52-point favorite in 2019, I think, and they just don't cover because the line is so large, and it's like, you've taken the starters out, so you're asking the backups to score 3 touchdowns basically to cover. So I went with, let me see here, 59-14. I think we both agree that there's going to be a defensive score here, unfortunately, for Ohio State, because that is one of your bold predictions. So, root against that if you have a rooting interest, like we all do. But, maybe a touchdown against the starters and maybe a touchdown against the backups. More likely, though, is there a big chunk play? I think they need a big chunk play to get into scoring position against the first team defense. I just, there's not going to be a ton of, I don't want to say interest, but defensively, like if Rutgers gets away with a couple of things, a trick play or something, like don't be surprised with that. So I went 59-14.
I had 52-10, and yeah, I mean, basically the same stuff that you just said. Ohio State's going to be, this should be a game where they're up 38-3 in the second quarter, and you just kind of put it on cruise control, and it's 14-7 in the second half because they score a touchdown with 5 minutes left against the third team. When they've got all the freshmen out there, they score a touchdown, and because I think Rutgers is going to have a starting caliber quarterback out there, and who is that? Is that Noah Vedral? Is that Gavin Wimsatt? Whoever it is, they're gonna want to get guys some reps probably if they're healthy enough to be out there. So they score something late. But yeah, I mean, this is going to be, I think, a classic Ohio State Rutgers. Kevin Noon, I think we talked about this on the show yesterday, but one of my favorite stats this week was Ohio State. Kevin Noon came up with this one, that Ohio State has outscored Rutgers 171-0 in the second quarter, but only 49-42 in the fourth quarter. It feels like it's going to be one of those deals where Ohio State will put up 24 points in the second quarter, and then it'll be 7-7 in the fourth quarter, something like that. And Ohio State ends up winning 52-10.
Yeah, and that's a reminder. Like, they've only played 8 times, so they're averaging like 3 touchdowns every second quarter. So this might be another one where Ohio State, if they win the toss, they'll take the ball, or if they lose the toss and Rutgers defers, they'll be glad to take the ball and just get the offense going and get that fast start going, and then get them out for too long. So, anything else, Tom, before we go?
I think we've talked more than enough about Rutgers, but don't worry, we're going to talk more about them on Saturday on the pregame show. It'll be we'll be at the stadium. Should be a fun day out at the stadium. And I mean, I think everyone kind of rolls their eyes at Rutgers, but also this is home game number 5, and so we are as of this moment halfway through the home schedule already. After tomorrow, we'll be more than halfway through the home schedule. Only 3 home games left after tomorrow, so. This is one where you have to kind of remind yourself, enjoy these games. They are precious and few over the course of the year. You wait all year for these. So even if it is Rutgers, even if the outcome is, does feel somewhat preordained, these are few and precious games. Enjoy them. I think the weather's supposed to be okay for the most part until maybe later in the afternoon. So enjoy a lovely afternoon out at Ohio Stadium. Watch a bunch of teenagers and people in their early 20s. Get some fresh air and exercise. That's all really you can ask, Tony.
Yeah, and does it concern you that this is the 15-year anniversary of the Stanford upset over USC? I don't know if that's true.
I'm kind of doing math in my head. It's like, it was 2007. It might be the 15th anniversary, but yeah, I think there have been plenty of years that have passed since that, and you have not had many upsets of that ilk. That was about a 41-point line, if I remember correctly, too. So one of the bigger upsets in college football history. I will boldly go on record and say probably not going to happen on Saturday.
Yeah, very typical of your bold predictions. Yeah, Tavita Pritchard is not coming through that door, folks. Let's go ahead and end it there. Thank you all for tuning in. A reminder, BuckeyeHuddle.com. Check it out. Become a member. See us there. Talk to us there. Plenty of inside information, plenty of recruiting coverage, plenty of team coverage from all of us in X's and O's. Definitely. A reminder, check out the post-game show that we will have for you pretty quickly after the game ends Saturday evening. And then also you can find us on YouTube at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. Go ahead and subscribe, hit the bell to be notified. That will do it for today. Thank you all, and we'll talk to you later.